Nearly 36 federal agents are headed to Albuquerque, the president announced on Wednesday. He says Democratic leaders haven't tackled the city's crime problem and claims he will. Of course, crime has been a problem under Republican leadership in New Mexico, too, as has unconstitutionally violent policing. Helping to look at the issue from different perspectives, our Line Opinion panel. We welcome former state senator and another Line regular, Diane Snyder. Julianne Grimm, she's with us. She's editor of the Santa Fe Reporter. And rounding out what we used to call the Line table is attorney and Line regular Sophie Martin. Julianne, let me start with you. Does this feel like, in your mind, the president sort of sticking a fuse in a powder keg here?
Certainly, I think there's a lot of questions about what exactly the motivations behind this effort are, the timing with this effort. You have the United States Attorney General, who, of course, the U.S. Attorney General here for the state of New Mexico, John Anderson, who is an appointee, of the Trump administration, explaining that, this has nothing to do with protesting. This has nothing to do with the federal agents that are on the ground in Portland. This is completely has to do with crime in Albuquerque. And I just think a lot of people are not buying that explanation. So I think there's already a lot of doubt about what is likely to happen, what's motivating this and then what will happen. You'll remember that the last time federal agents made a big deal about coming into Albuquerque to do a sting, they said they were targeting the worst of the worst, and they ended up arresting 100 people, mostly on low-level drug crimes, and their arrests disproportionately affected the African-American community in Albuquerque. And so I think all of that baggage is weighing into how people view this news. And so it's not great news for Albuquerque.
Interesting points there. Senator Snyder, interestingly, how this all started, it appears we have a Democrat in our town, our Bernalillo County, Manny Gonzalez, who went to Washington to meet with the president and Attorney General Barr. And, we can judge him on whether that was appropriate or not, but Senator says he should resign, that he's looking for trouble. Where does the sheriff fit into all this in your mind's eye?
Well, first of all, he was invited, and the federal agents have worked with both the county and the city here in Albuquerque in the past. Sheriff Gonzalez has been very vocal about trying to fight crime. And by the way, he was re-elected overwhelmingly at this last election. So I find it amusing that a senator of his party's now calling for his resignation. But I think the thing that's most important is we need to remember, just because we're not seeing it on the news, the virus has taken over, crime has not gone away. We're still number 2 in the country for violent crime. We have like this, the gentleman who was on with the president, his wife, Mr. Vigil, his wife was killed sitting in her car. That was 8 or 9 months ago, and nothing's happened about it. Now, and that's not to say that the police are not working on it, but nothing has happened. If you look at the difference between Portland and if you would go and look at Kansas City is where Operation Legend is operating. Portland is not it. It is totally different. They wear their uniforms. They have identification that you know who they are. They're not the military. They're Homeland Security. They're DEA. They're people like that can help solve our crimes. And also, don't forget, just a few short months ago, the mayor called the governor and said, I need some help. I can't take care of everything, the crime in my city. Please send me some state police. And she did for a few months. So everybody, it's just, I can't help but believe that if this was President Obama offering to send in help, that we wouldn't have this kind of reaction to it. Now, I'm a firm believer that if they start infringing on civil rights, that's something different. But they have not done that, nor have they been accused of that yet in Kansas City, only in Portland. So it's a totally different program. And you know something? We need the help. We second in the nation on violent crime. That's not gone away. We just haven't been talking about it lately. There have been at least 20 something people already killed this year. And that's not even been covered in the news because the virus is so much more important at this time. So I think it could be a very good thing. It would free up while they're investigating crimes, it could free up our officers to do some other things and make sure, because don't forget, they're being called upon to help with the enforcement of the virus restrictions. So we don't have, even though the mayor has added some officers, we don't have enough people to take care of all of our problems. So I think
let me kick something over to Sophie. You just mentioned as well. AG Barr says this won't be Portland. It's going to be just, classic policing. What are these folks exactly going to be doing? Senator just mentioned, investigating and doing other policing type things. I can't quite see that. Does anybody know what these folks are going to be doing?
It's actually somewhat ambiguous because we're getting different messages from different parts of the federal executive. So President Trump is talking about concerns regarding protests and certain types of violence, and AG Barr is talking about different issues. But I think that one of the things that's causing real concern is that what's been put forward by the federal government at this point is not exactly what happened in Kansas City, in that the Kansas City program was invited by the mayor. There was actually, I'm forgetting if it's he or she, but there was an agreement that was struck in advance of that program starting. And the Albuquerque mayor and the New Mexico governor have both said, we don't have that. This kind of got sprung on us. And that it's actually normal for state and local and federal forces to work together. But they do that under a structured program in which it starts with the community saying this is something that we want and we need. And so we do have programs already, as both the mayor and the Albuquerque police chief have pointed out. We do have programs in Albuquerque already where they're working with federal agencies on issues involving crime, but this feels different. And I think part of it is there's this concern regarding Portland that there wasn't buy-in from the local community for what has happened. And then the federal government is saying this is going to be more like Kansas City, but Kansas City had the buy-in. And so which one is it? It has flavors of both. And I think that creates very real concerns that more of Portland may happen because the program sounds like it's going to be imposed upon Albuquerque. Now, what's interesting always with President Trump is that there's ambiguity in what he says. He says they should invite us in, and it makes it sound like that invitation still needs to happen. And in fact, Albuquerque Mayor Keller has said, I believe it was he, has said, there's going to need to be an agreement. And if we don't have an agreement that we can work with, then this can't go forward. So I think that there's this kind of cart before the horse thing that gets us to this. President Trump is running for re-election. He is trying clearly to reposition himself back into his sort of law and order candidacy, that idea that he's a law and order choice for the presidential election.
Let me ask you a question on that point. Are we being used? That's what
I was just going to get to. So who is being focused on, right? It's Chicago.
5 electoral votes. Why not burn 5 electoral votes to make a bigger?
Yes. And that's true in Albuquerque, here in New Mexico. It's true in Illinois. President Trump can have no expectation he's going to win in Illinois or win in Chicago. These are safe communities for him to target because it signals to his electoral base in other parts of the country that he's taking action, that he's, moving forcibly on these issues. Mm-hmm. But he's not, I think he can reasonably expect that he's not really sacrificing votes in states and areas that were likely to vote for him and are now going to be alienated.
Gotcha. Didn't mean to jump your point there. I should.
No. I wanted that. That's great. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Julianne, interestingly, our governor and our AG have formed, and Senator mentioned this a second ago, a civil rights monitoring group to watch these federal agents, and not troops, federal agents, saying if the feds really want to help, great. But if they're here to just antagonize, we're going to use our levers of, whatever we can. The Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania AG saying the same thing. A lot of AGs are rising up and saying, okay, we're going to watch you guys, but you just can't step out of line. Is that a reasonable boundary?
Well, look, the state has not done a great job of upholding people's civil rights and making sure that the police forces that are within their jurisdiction have, behaved in a way that's above board. So I think that there's skepticism about that also. I think there's this political gut reaction like, oh, Donald Trump is going to send in federal, officers. And so the Democratic governor better say that's bad. And the Democratic AG better say, we're watching you. And I think this, partisan tennis match is just boring and it's not helpful and it's not fighting crime. I think that the point about the language and the ambiguity is something that I picked up on because everybody is using a different phrase and it's all coded language that doesn't really mean what they intend it to mean. So just for an example of that, we have this idea of tackling gun violence, right? That's something that, hey, for the Republican president to even use tackling and gun in the same sentence, like, are we talking about gun legislation at the federal level that the president would support? No, we're not talking about that. Then you have the sheriff of Bernalillo County saying, well, they're coming here to solve homicides. Well, which is it? Are they tackling gun violence or are they solving homicides? Because in my experience, those are not the same actions. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of question about that. And I think it's maybe a good point for me to interject that, there's been a lot of discussion about Portland and about the violence that's happening between police from the city of Portland and the people who live there, and now this extra layer of the federal troops. And it's worth noting that the Santa Fe Reporter is owned by the husband of the Attorney General of the state of Oregon. That doesn't mean that I have any inside information or particular bias because of that relationship, but I just thought it was worth disclosing since we've been talking about it.
I appreciate you doing that.
I think there's one quick point that we're missing totally, is the big difference in Portland is that protesters, not the advocates, attacked a federal building and set it on fire. And they have probably blinded a young man that was working there. There were people in that building when they set the building on fire. So it is totally legitimate for a president to send in troops to Senator, protect federal property.
Local law enforcement handle that? I mean,
they haven't. They haven't. Okay. They haven't. They have stayed away. The city of Portland police have not even gone down to the site.
But this idea that they're protecting the courthouse and that's all they're doing, that's a red herring. You don't have to be driving around in a rented minivan and scooping up people off the streets and arresting them when they're nowhere near the courthouse.
Right. I agree with that. But still, the reason they came was because of attacking federal property.
And so whatever they do while they're there is cool? I mean, the reason they came is also questionable.
I did not say that. But there is a major difference between coming into New Mexico and into Kansas City, besides the agreement, than it is to Portland.
We'll have to see how this all plays out. Very interesting. 35 federal agents coming to Albuquerque from various agencies to help solve our crime problem. We'll be back with this group to talk COVID in a little bit.